Hello and welcome to the second episode of the War Report this week. Now, I may not have an episode out next week. I'll be a bit busy, but nonetheless, you'll get this. Hopefully, it is Saturday morning by the time you're hearing this. And I like to start out every show this way, but I say this probably the most seriously I've said it this time. All hell has broken loose. Now, let's get our Syria map. You'll be able to see before I even say anything. Uh, right there and right there. I mean, just look at the activity in northwestern Syria. All those blue dots, which are said to be the coalition, are Turkish attacks specifically. Now, for those of you out of the know, which I imagine most of you probably heard this already, not Turkish backed forces, not Turkish proxies. The proper Turkish military pushed into Syria and actually dealt quite a few blows to the Syrian government forces. Now, this took me off guard. I was not expecting it. We speculated that Turkey might have some sort of response to save face because they've invested so much in this. Erdogan's invested both his credibility at home and abroad on this Syria issue specifically. A little less in Libya, which I don't know, we might get into, we might not, but specifically in Syria, specifically for the battle for Idlib. And lo and behold, he actually does it. They push in, they take the one pivotal highway town. What was it?
Sarkib, I think.
Sarkib, yes.
Yeah, which is on the crossroads of M5 and M4 highways.
Yeah, pretty much severing Damascus to Aleppo. Now, that was an unexpected attack because the action there has been pretty low for a while now. So, most of the elite forces were not in that area. And, I mean, I suppose it's the perfect place for the Turkish forces to strike and possibly an error in judgment to Syria for not guarding such a pivotal town closer. Now, in response to this, there was an airstrike. It's debated whether it's Russian or Syrian. I personally think it's Syrian. The Turkish said it was Syrian. The United States said it was a Syrian airstrike that killed a few dozen Turkish troops. And the reason why some people may have speculated it's Russia, and we'll get into some of the Russia stuff, I guess, right now, is Putin, after all these events over the past day and a half or so, canceled his upcoming meeting with Erdogan, and the official reason given was he's just too busy with domestic issues until March 5th. You'll have to get back to us then. March 5th, coincidentally enough, you want to tie this all together, the day
Hmm.
Stalin died. So make of that what you will.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Sorry, busy.
But in possibly bigger news, there were Russian naval drills by the Black Sea Fleet near Turkish territorial waters.
Yes, I'm sure that's just like snubbing Erdogan uh, in their canceled meeting. Uh, Practicing drills close to the Turkish border is basically a signal. It's a signal. That whatever we say publicly, we know that this could get out of hand, and we're going to be willing to demonstrate our power, and it'll be something like this, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Like that's the whole point of it, is to demonstrate that you're willing to use power.
Oh, absolutely. And I know they at least got some of the S400s, but if I correct me if I'm wrong, that's still a deal in progress. They haven't gotten all of them yet, have they?
Yeah, not as far as I know.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out because that's a big piece of leverage. Because I mean, you look at this, they snubbed the United States in their involvement in the F-35 program to get the S-400s, and then they immediately go back and do something. Probably the one thing they could do to tarnish relations with Russia at this time. And lo and behold, Erdogan, because he put so much stake on this domestically, does it. Now, I
Yeah.
said, actually, funny enough, when this show first started, we're actually coming up. We've been doing this about 2 years. I believe it was March 2018 when we started. Now, those episodes have been lost to history for a few reasons, which I won't get into now. Not really relevant. But I said within our first few episodes, March 2018, that Erdogan has played every side of this war but the Kurds, and it's going to come back to haunt him. And for a while there, I thought, yeah, he's solidified, he's in the Russian camp. It seems like he's made up his mind. But lo and behold, I am wrong, and it turns out my first prediction, my gut instinct about the situation, was right. He has painted himself into a corner. What is he to do now? He has angered the Europeans, which we'll get into some of the stuff with NATO's response to this. He's angered the United States more recently, and now to throw fuel on the fire, he's angered the Russians. Who is going to bail him out here? Who is going to tolerate this? And it looks like Russia isn't willing to just come to the table this time after, like they did after the uh, jet incident in 2015. No, it looks like it's going to take a little bit, if at all, to mend this relationship. Now, I think some sort of mending, some sort of a detente will begin eventually, but I don't see it ever being the same. I don't see it being as warm as it was before. And probably because they're dealing with sanctions and a virus outbreak and a crumbling healthcare system and international pressure in general, I don't believe Iran has given a statement on the situation. So neither is Israel or Saudi Arabia. So it seems like the other big powers, regional powers at least, have really stayed quiet on this.
Yeah. I mean, I was personally, I always thought that Erdogan, if things got out of control, if things weren't going his way in Syria, that or it could have been something else. It could have been a deal gone wrong with the EU. It could have been America showing indifference or preference for another player that they wish they hadn't. But I always assumed that Erdogan had a very strong likelihood that he would release the migrants and the refugees into Europe, and this has done it. You could look at like even the gain of that M5 and M4 crossroads still isn't enough, because I think he sees that like he's not going to get help. He's already removed over 3,000 fighters anyways to go fight in Libya. Some of his own actual Turkish forces are in Libya as well. And of course, there was over a dozen that were killed recently. So you're right. He gambled everything. He thought that he could play all sides. Now, I would still give him the benefit of the doubt because, of course, America is just as invested as removing Russia from Syria and also removing Assad. What they're not willing to do is to do the fighting for it. And I think that's what it has made everyone feel betrayed. Even though Stoltenberg, head of NATO, gave like an emergency speech this morning and stated, we actually are helping Turkey.
Also, Kosovo came out and gave their support.
Yes,
let's not forget
Kosovo, that. It's a real country. So, yes. So, yeah, of course, Kosovo and Albania, literally America's best friends. They wrote a song about it. So, yeah, so Stoltenberg basically said that their AWACS jets are up in the air and they're helping the Turks, use their ground-to-air defense missiles systems against Syrian and Russian jets and so on and so on. The thing is,
surface-to-air missiles don't do much good when you're invading a country.
Yeah. So they're not going to fly into Turkish territory, and they don't need to fly into Turkish territory to wipe these guys out, anyways. So that's not much of a hand if you're Erdogan. Both Russia and Turkey's economies are slowing down because of this war. This is a real potential problem later on, and we discussed on the last show that especially more so for Erdogan than for Putin. But that isn't to trivialize Russia's predicament either. So yeah, I always thought that he would eventually do this. That there would always be a reason. He had. I mean, he's showing that he's. I mean, if you watch his speeches, he's a frustrated and emotional guy. Uh, virtually the opposite of Putin. With Putin, you can kind of sense when he's straight or stern, but you never see him fly off the handle like that.
You know,
Not
I do think it's interesting that in the 21st century, we're yet again getting a man with a small mustache giving angry speeches.
Yikes. So yeah, so strategically, when I heard about them going to the south, of Idlib, the Syrian army, that is, I thought like maybe it would have been better to not do that and to basically secure the area around Saraki, but also in a kind of long north to south line, keep pushing toward the Turkish border instead of trying to do a pincer movement, because in a sense, doing a pincer movement with low resources is going to be very difficult. So they were overwhelmed. Syria's more battle-hardened and crack units were sent to the south, and they took a lot more land than they lost in the north. But the truth is that they didn't necessarily take land that was as crucial or as important.
Yeah, quality over quantity.
Because, right. Primarily because that highway, I would say, right after the importance of opening up the airport in Aleppo, just as important, or almost as important, is the M5 highway that links those two cities. That was really crucial, and that could have gone a long way to begin recovery for Syria, economic recovery, and economic goods being transported in a more efficient and quick way from one end of the country to the other, literally from the north to the south. And that would also have had an effect on the people who, especially those who feel trapped in Idlib, right? So, but they didn't use that strategy, and they decided that they were going to do this massive pincer movement where they were going to attack from the south, and they were overwhelmed. And I think they're still in the outskirts of the town. They're still fighting, and I think the 25th is the unit that was deployed in the south. That's on its way back up north to hopefully retake that town. So, costly error definitely made it in the news, and finally that 900,000, who knows what the actual number is, it was definitely, apparently it was 400,000 about 3-4 weeks ago. It's now around 900,000. I think that's, you could be off by a few 100,000, but we're talking about a very substantial number of people nonetheless. And the borders were closed, and so now those borders are open. And I don't know how much of the migrants that are flooding into Europe now are coming from the established camps from years ago. So I don't know the exact admixture, but a lot of, if it's a lot of these, some of these people fleeing that refuse to live under Assad could very well, and they're all men. If you look at the videos, they're literally.
It's strange. You have these grown men, about fighting age, who speak Turkmen, don't look Arab, but they must be these refugees that we're supposed to welcome.
Right. So again, the empire is at a loss, and is you could say revisiting an area that could be a breaking point, and that is to successfully fight wars in the Middle East for the interests of American hegemony and Western hegemony. The cost is that you will take in millions of migrants. That's great because the economy needs it.
Who's gonna
So
pay for those pensions?
that's right. That's right. Who's going to pay for the pensions? So that's the cost of it. Middle Eastern countries are not going to take them in. Many of them have been coping for over 7 or 8 years. They're not. So Europe will have to take them. Even America cynically will not take them, and America should take them. It's their war, and Israel should take them, but you know they're not. So yeah, so one of the things that we kind of thought might happen actually happened, and we'll see how far things progress. Now, Erdogan is still saying that come Monday or Sunday, somewhere around there, he's going to launch a full scale attack on Syria with his regular troops. They won't even need the backing. Well, they didn't do that well in Afrin, and they lost a lot. I mean, they lost several Leopard 2 tanks, and this has diminished the reputation of the Leopard 2. At one time, considered the best modern tank, easily the best modern tank in the last 15, 20 years.
You know, not,
Uh,
now that you bring that up, we are seeing a lot of failures in recent years with modern tanks and armored vehicles, whether that be the Merkava or the Abrams in Israel and Lebanon, or some of the Leopard tank problems in Turkey. It seems like a lot, a lot of the military equipment we designed is still for a different age, for a different era, perhaps fighting on the northern European plain, and it doesn't translate well to the Middle East.
well, I mean, the thing is we have ground to ground and ground to air man pads. That's it. The war has gone far more mobile. So that trend that we've seen from fighting a pitched battle in the open to fighting guerrilla tactics, that evolution that we've seen in warfare, keeps going that way. So even the fight on the open steppes in Russia and Ukraine with tanks, it is a hybrid. On the one hand, it is warfare in a sense that was fought traditionally for many centuries, but also it relied on, because of course tanks would hide in small areas where there were shrubs and camouflage. So this kind of more covert or guerrilla war tactics are being employed. And I mean, I remember when the war broke out in Ukraine, and there was a Leopard 2 tank that was given to, or somehow the Ukrainians had kept it and not sold it to the Novorossiyans. Anyhow, it was totaled. So I thought that was a one-off, personally. I thought that was a one-off. But, Afrin lost at least 4 or 5. And most of Turkey's tanks are not Leopard 2s. They're another variant whose name escapes me, and it's an older and less sophisticated tank with thinner armor. So yeah, that's where we are now. Now, like, we'll see what happens. Are they ever going to take Idlib city? Are they going for broke? This war began with a pipeline idea that would go from Iran across Iraq into Syria and into the Mediterranean. And of course, Turkey was not happy about that because they have a pipeline from Azerbaijan that goes into Turkey and then goes directly to Israel. So, of course, they've looked for other methods, including the working with the Kurds. The Kurds actually, the YPK actually proposed this to deliver oil to Israel. Israel really likes oil. Reminds me of a certain president. He really likes oil too. So again, it's about getting as much oil to Israel as possible to diversify its oil acquisition portfolio and so on. And so far, nothing really, nothing new has been built in the way of that, but it does show you some of the overarching interests at hand and some of the reasons for this conflict. There isn't just one. Because most of the people who are fighting are not like, sure, there are families who are fighting to be in on that deal, and that's in a kind of nepotistic way. But the truth is, a lot of the people who go to fight in Syria they're ideologues. They're not fighting for a pipeline. They would literally be happy to live in Idlib, with whatever Sharia law is going on. And I say this unironically, that would be enough. Life would be fulfilled for them. So, the big players at the top have one set of interests, and the fighters down below have another set.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, one last thing before I wrap up this Syria thing and get into the migrant crisis. In terms of this absolute blunder, now it's well known that Syrian forces are oftentimes not only advised, but sometimes when it comes to the high command, directly commanded by Iranian and Russian commanders, of course, as well as homegrown Syrian ones. Who do you think made this call? Because it seems like a massive blunder for a Russian or an Iranian general or officer to have made, but I mean, even for a Syrian officer, because I know the joke about Arabs is they can't win wars, but I mean, Syria has always been sort of an exception, at least in recent history, with their high command. Who do
Or
you think?
Hezbollah,
Yeah,
for that
yeah.
matter.
Who do you think made this call?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. Uh, all I know is that the forces that were left behind to defend Sarakib, were apparently, according to some sources, low in morale. And I think the low in morale is because, of course, the battle-hardened, more experienced units had all driven down south. I don't honestly. I don't know who could have done it, but it had to be somebody that was affected by this amazing amount of success, because within 2-3 weeks, Syria had recaptured over a third of Idlib. I mean, it was massive, and all the most important strategic areas. Literally, Idlib city is the only important spot right now.
I
Right?
would hazard to
That
say, actually, that I think the Russians may have made this call because what you look at
mm,
here is we've talked about this before. They've been pushing for the fast conclusion, so maybe they were hoping they could just sort of just pile drive into Idlib and end it quickly while leaving that less defended. And I don't say that just purely as speculation, but there were some pro-government media sources in Syria sort of laying the blame on Russia for this for not providing enough air support.
I heard that too, and but according to Turkish forces, they felt like they were being pounded by Russian jets. So I don't know. I think it could have been the Russians. I can understand why they would want like a speedy end to this, because nobody, Assad is not going to go to the UN and negotiate something. He literally can't leave the country. Um, I think your guess that it could have been Russia is probably a good one. Uh, I think Assad does actually believe that Syria will be reunited at one point, like that all the land will be taken back. Unfortunately, he depends heavily on Russia, and this is taxing Russia. So, yeah, I would say that Russia needs a resolution to this more quickly than he does, because ultimately they represent Assad, and ultimately nobody's expecting Assad from the West, to broker a deal or to I don't know, give an ultimatum. Um, we know that the Syrian army could not have accomplished any of this without the help of Russia and Iran, particularly Russia's bombing campaigns would have made this next to impossible. And now what you have is Turkish jets that are also flying into Syria. But yeah, I don't want to go too far off topic. But yeah, I think maybe the guess that it could have been Russia is probably a good one. Or it could have been a kind of a joint decision, a kind of, well, the intelligence, Syria is giving the intelligence and is sort of giving the green light, like, yeah, we've got this. We can go to the south, and Russia says, okay, we go. I don't know quite how it would have happened, but I think your explanation that a quicker conclusion to all of this is certainly something that is in Russia's interest, maybe more so than anybody else.
Now, moving on from that directly into an event related to this, as we mentioned earlier, Turkey has opened the migrant floodgates, and already there's rioting happening on the Greek islands with some of the arriving migrants and the riot police and Greek civilians at that. You have
And they're not throwing plates.
they're not throwing plates.
They're not throwing dinner plates,
They're
people.
not throwing dinner plates. Important, noted. Hear me out. This is not some weird celebratory thing. This is rage. And you know what? Golden Dawn might actually finally break that 5%. Doubtful, but
Yeah.
but Bulgaria, their prime minister was concerned. He was calling on EU leadership to convene a meeting to deal with this crisis. And it seems like a lot of Europe is concerned, even Germany, which is sort of at maximum capacity when it comes to migrants. As much as they love the tolerance and diversity, even they're saying enough is enough, which is a bit
Yeah.
surreal. Maybe the UK, I hear they're looking for more legal immigration. Maybe they could have some
As
fun
long
with
as
that.
it's legal.
Oh, of course, as long as it's legal. But on top of that, the anti-migration party in Slovenia, which shares a border directly with Hungary, and the person at the head of the party, I can't remember the name, who is directly affiliated with Orban's party and Orban himself, won Prime Minister's office of Slovenia. So we could see a more united front on that when it comes to an anti-migrant bulwark. I think Romania is also
Absolutely.
heading in that direction, and
Yeah.
we may finally see the Bulgarian border pigs again. They might break those out again.
Well, Bulgaria has moved an extra 1,000 troops today to the border. I think Bulgaria will be serious about this, as will Hungary, I think. Um, Greece is trying to manage because, of course, Greece feels slighted. I mean, they really are kind of like a third-tier member of NATO. Turkey not only has troops in Syria and Libya, as we already know, but they have them in a few African countries, Qatar, and of course now they've been moving troops into Cyprus. And so this act by Erdogan is looked at as an attack. Basically, it's overwhelming their politics. It's overwhelming their economy. They have problems from the first waves of 2015 and 16, and this is another wave.
And keep in mind, the first wave, it just passed through. They all went to Western Europe, specifically Germany and the Nordic states and France, and that's
Right,
just the damage they did on their way through it. They didn't even settle there.
right. But Greece is, let's say, nursing or keeping several thousands of refugees, anyways. Um, and so this is overwhelming them, basically. You're looking at a country that had an economic collapse, is on austerity, whose governments dissolved very quickly, is very politically unstable and unhappy with the fate of their nation, and you have this by Turkey, who routinely flies into Greek airspace on a daily basis, and is moving troops and isn't supposed to be moving troops into Cyprus. So, America can't have like Blumph asking for more donations for what is ultimately an American project, and at the same time not quell the inter arguments occurring within the organization. Right? Something has to be done about that. And yeah, you know what? The solution might be something that sounds more natal, that sounds more right wing, like respecting, basic stuff like respecting borders, or maybe you can't win this war without more refugees, and Europe is at a breaking point because of it. So that's never addressed. It's always, oh, you're just racist. Like, you're just racist. It's just a way to perpetuate endless Middle Eastern wars. And yeah, so
Yeah, like
I think
that goes back to the dynamic that Muslims, it's a religion of peace when you have to take them in, but it's a violent ideology that must be crushed when we need to go in and invade their countries.
right, and the migrants that we're talking about here, of course, we all know that about 50% of the combatants are not Syrian. I mean, many are not even Arabs, let alone Syrians. We have the Uyghurs from China. We have, of course, we mentioned the last show, Kazakhstani. We have Turkmen, both from Central Asia and from Turkey proper, or that, or we have this. There's literally sub-Saharan Africans. I was watching a
Chechens.
video of Chechens, of course, and so I was watching a video on France 24 where three French quotations jihadists, two Arabs, and one sub-Saharan African have been fighting, and actually were there when they conquered and took Idlib from Assad back in 2013. So they've been there for nearly 7 years, and they're not going to leave. And of course, they'll tell you that, well, we're not affiliated with Tahrir or al-Sham. We're not affiliated with any of these terrorist groups. But the truth is, you fight the same enemy. And like maybe your idea of Sharia law doesn't match their idea, right? Or your idea of a Salafist state isn't quite like theirs. But like, to the Westerner, this is meaningless. Like, this is splitting hairs. No one cares about this. So you've got now migrants who, of course, are young men, able young men who don't want to be drafted in the army, and that's the main difference, right? When Syria began retaking all this land back in 2016 and 2017, of course, they allowed those who wanted to fight another day to go to Idlib on the Turkish border, and whoever else was left over, they could either escape out of Syria vis-a-vis by becoming a migrant or a refugee, or they could join the Syrian army. And so what you're looking at are people who have been there for ages, for years, and under no terms do they want to be integrated back into Syria, or by essentially they're avoiding the draft. But the bigger question is, or the bigger point to elucidate, is that they're not willing to integrate with this new Syria. They were willing to live indefinitely the way they were in this little breakaway place. And that's it. That's essentially it. And that's who is going to be crossing over into the West. And I'm sure they're very well aware that that the West tacitly has been on their side. But that won't quell their anger. And they probably already have, conspiracy theories that, this was just an elaborate ruse between Russia and the West to corner them this way, like dogs. And, Turkey didn't help really, and not too little too late. And where is America? And, where is France and Britain, and so on and so on. And this will fuel anger. And let's not forget that when Charlie Hebdo happened, those two assailants had fought in Syria.
Pretty sure
these
same
guys
with the Paris terrorist attacks too.
Right. So they've many of them served their sentence, and then they just go back to Syria. So that's what you're left with, right? And so, this is the breaking point of American foreign policy. That's it. Like, you know, Europe has to take um, all the negatives basically are for Europe, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, I think I mean, the populist right is going to gain strength from this. There's no question about that. That's also another breaking point for Europe. On the surface, it's multiculturalism, it's global homo, it's open borders. Um, Coronavirus is dangerous. We have to do something about it, except stop travel. So, um, so now you're going to have other fears because, of course, um, we've seen lots of deaths in Iran. Now the total is like over 24 dead.
Yeah, and government
Uh,
officials are even coming down with some symptoms. Like I said, that's consequences of the absolute collapse of the healthcare system under American sanctions, and it's the like. Look, this tells us a few things: that the virus is either much worse than they're letting on, or that the Iranian healthcare system has crumbled so much that even their elites cannot get proper care. Which I err on the side
that's
of the
disturbing.
latter in that case.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. So yeah, we're seeing a replay of 2015-16, and it's a breaking point. You know, um, Erdogan might decide to release even more. I mean, he's doing this basically to gain help from NATO. He wants NATO involved,
Well,
and
I just saw actually a recent report that Greece is sending 50 vessels and special forces to patrol the waters where migrants will be coming in.
yeah,
Uh, I mean, this is again the this is going to be bigger than 2015 2016 migrant crisis because not only that, look, the wave of migrants is probably going to be about the same capacity, but that's added on to the ones that have already arrived and traveled through there. But that's also added to the new political instability, as we mentioned, the virus, which we'll get into later, as we mentioned with the rise of more populistic parties, which I think, on a side note, one other thing we'll see is more Denmark's, where establishment neoliberal and social democracy parties will adopt a stricter border policy in order to maintain their grip on power as a temporary sacrifice. Um, I wouldn't be
right. And
surprised.
you could see that Macron was already ahead of this because we recall that in the late fall, early winter of 2019, he was already proposing stricter border control,
Yeah,
and it's in a sense he acquiesced, right? Or maybe he cynically thought he would have stricter border control, but then revise the France's pension plan. So who knows?
yeah, that worked out. That worked out swimmingly. But yeah, this is probably the biggest thing that's going to drive a wedge in NATO because, of course, the Anglo-American sphere supports Turkey doing their dirty work in Syria, as we said. France, despite the fact they gave no other indications of support, said Turkey's operation was justified. You have most Western European establishments, especially Germany, who's on good terms with Turkey, completely on board with this. They're completely fine with it. But then you get into Eastern Europe, which, funny enough, will agree with Turkey when it comes to countering Russia or having a Turkish contingent in Estonia to patrol the uh, Russian border or whatever. But they're going to draw the lines at migrants, and we're going to see in Eastern Europe, at least on a political level, among the parties, among the ruling class, do they oppose migration more or do they oppose Russian more? And I think that's going to drive a wedge in Eastern Europe, especially between political parties. You're probably going to see more Orban
Yeah.
type figures as we saw. Italy, which already had their problems, not number one with the viruses. Again, we'll get into that. Number two, with Turkey, there were some calls for boycotts with Turkey a few months back, not only from people on the ground levels, but opposition parties. Even some figures in government positions said that. Uh, you have that, uh, and again, this will probably lead to groups like the ADF or the whatever the Front National rebranded to, or even again Macron sort of doing a flip flop where he takes a more populist line on these sort of things. This is probably the biggest thing that's going to drive a wedge between at this point, I don't want to go this far, but the Anglo-American sphere of NATO and the continental Europe, specifically Eastern Europe.
Yes, you see support. For instance, there's pressure on Poland to accept refugees, of course, right? But they haven't taken any, and Hungary has had to resort to building a fence, uh, effectively enclosing the whole country off. Something which Poland hasn't had to do. However, Poland is entirely supportive of Hungary, as I'm sure Slovakia, Slovenia, and Czechia are as well. Right. So what you have is
Romania
like
now
even
too.
if, right. So like let's say I don't know, Romania or Bulgaria had to take them in, or pressure was being applied to Hungary all over again, or Slovenia or what have you. Um, you will raise the ire of the other countries in Eastern Europe. Because I think they kind of fundamentally see where things are going. And, the breaking point that I already had mentioned is more clear to them because they're more upset with the dominant political narrative and the ideological narrative of the EU and NATO and the West, which, to sum it up in a word, global homo. And so there's different things that they do in order to accommodate and even adapt to some of the principles of Western neoliberalism. But this is a breaking point for them. But it is part of the deal. And, I wonder before the end of this year or before the elections in the US, if we're going to see a terrorist attack, like a significant terrorist attack, occur.
Yeah,
It's a possibility.
I think another Paris is in the cards. Maybe not like, of course, in France, but I think something to that scale where upwards of 100 people die, several more injured. Yeah, I could see that happening in another major Western city, or we could get a series of another small attacks like we saw in Germany or the UK,
Yeah.
with whether that be with trucks or like with butcher's knives or anything of that sort.
Right, because you have Muslims in Europe, most of them Sunni, who are very upset that the West is not doing more to counter Assad. So if it's not going to be in the population moving in from Turkey, it could be the population that's already been there for years that isn't even from Syria or fought in Syria, who are going to be upset about this.
Well, yeah. So before I move on, I just want to say, I said going into this, you can watch my 2019 review episode. No, that was a pretty good one. Uh, that the 2020s, and particularly the first year of it, 2020, was going to be a pivotal year and a pivotal decade. But I did not expect. I expected a lot of this stuff, similar things, but I did not expect it to happen this rapidly. Look, there were talks of like we're overdue for a major pandemic, we're overdue for the spread of a virus, we're overdue for wars. Things are brewing in the Middle East now. At the time, it was mainly with Iran. It's since shifted, but I figured, yeah, that'll probably all pan out over the 2020s. I did not expect to get that within the first 2 months of the decade. And yeah,
Right.
it's February 28th right now. Of course, leap year, so 29th. But by the time this, by the time next week starts, within 2 months of the new decade, all of this has happened already. I mean,
Yeah,
things are accelerating. Accelerationists, you finally got your wish. I hope you're happy.
yeah, I'm happy. No.
I mean, but in all honesty, I look, not to be morbid about this, but or downplay any of this, but I see a lot of opportunity for good to come out of this chaos.
Yeah, be, primarily because it's another example where America's hegemony, Western Europe's hegemony, neoliberalism is. I hate to keep repeating, but it's at a breaking. It literally cannot accomplish everything that it set out to accomplish 2 decades ago, and because it's now it's overstressing, it's burdening the system, and most people are not happy. They're less happy. We've already seen how much these issues of borders and endless wars are affecting the population, often much more so than economic concerns.
Oh, absolutely. And even when it comes to things as simple as more gay pride parades in Europe and more just cultural shifts funded from the outside, but you use the term breaking point, but it's also just an impotence, and it calls into question the entire narrative of the post-war order, of all these liberal institutions established at the end of World War II and of course expanded at the end of the Cold War to the point where these things that were hailed as just like infallible, the new religion, so much greater than those Nazis and communists who are just bound to failure because their ideas aren't liberal enough. When, in many ways, I know I make this comparison all the time, it resembles the late stage Soviet Union with more money and on a larger scale because we're a global empire rather than just a Eurasian empire.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, very much so. And there's, and of course there are challengers now. But the challenges are myriad. It's not just China. It's how things are done and what are the goals. Part of the problem are the goals of capitalism itself, right? Like it's a shark; it can't stand still or it dies. So if they don't find different ways to enrich themselves even further, if they don't have a better bottom line, then the perception is that they're failing. So, in several ways, this project is unsustainable, and especially when you think of PNAC in 2000 and 2001. The idea that we're going to fund a war between Iran and Iraq, and then we're going to destroy Iraq. But ultimately, what we really want is Syria, but we have to destroy Iraq first. And so here they are, 9 years, still waiting to destroy Syria.
I can only imagine what Bill Kristol goes through every night with his entire life's work, entire life plan just collapsing. It's like you want to feel bad for him, but then you remember all the terrible things he's done. But yeah, that must be surreal. Like these people who, the Bill Kristals, the Max Boot types, all these people, all the different PNAC people, all the people in the Bush administration, and subsequently the Obama administration, even now the Trump administration, watching this thing that they planned meticulously for decades completely come apart at the seams because of just stupid errors. But uh, keeping on the same theme, but moving on, it's been a big week in the Balkans between the migrant crisis and just everything going on. But it looks like another pet project of Western hegemony, Bosnia, is heading towards some rocky times with more ethnic conflict, with elections, with all that kind of good stuff. So you were telling me about this earlier. You sent me a message about that.
Yeah, so basically, as it stands right now, there's a possibility of a referendum that will take place in Bosnia, and that the ethnic Serbs might be able to essentially like break away. So they're threatening to secede. Now, how is America going to react to this? Because like Bosnia and Kosovo are literally the most important states in Europe for America, and
Yeah, just to tie back that comparison, Serbia is the Syria, while Russia is the Iran on the European perspective.
yeah, yeah. So what you know how is that going to pan out? Because of course it has not been it has not been a comfortable coexistence. There has always been tensions. just as there's been in Kosovo, perhaps less so, but they are there. And if this election, like if it's stopped, that will cause a reaction. If it's successful, then the push to cede from Bosnia proper is also going to cause trouble. Now, what is America prepared to do? And that's the interesting thing.
Keep in mind, there's an American airfield in Bosnia.
Yes, yeah.
Uh, and Bosnia is actually not part of NATO, believe it or not, which yeah, is a little.
Although it's filled with NATO troops.
Yeah. I mean, it might as well get the benefits out of it if it's going to be a staging ground for them. But who am I to say? But yeah, I mean, on top of that, with the migrant crisis, with growing, people are becoming more aware of their national ethnic identity again. After now, the Balkans hasn't had this problem as much as, for example, Western Europe and the Anglosphere. A lot of Eastern Europe hasn't, but you're getting this again growing of national consciousness. I mean, you throw in and what frankly amounts to an invasion force on top of this. Who knows what's going to happen? And uh, yeah, I mean, we could also see some things go down in Bosnia, especially with the influx of Muslims. I mean, Bosnia's already like 51% Muslim, and uh, yeah, I'm just saying it's the perfect storm, as it were. And with that, I want to touch a little bit on the.
Yeah.
St-
I should mention
Continue.
that the Serbian politician who's kind of spearheading some of this is Dodik, and you notice how the EU has been pretty quiet about this. Um, Bosnia had like 1 year of a stalemate in their government, and religious tensions are increasing. So yeah, there's a strong possibility of a very chaotic period that's going to begin in 2020 in Bosnia, and how NATO is going to react and how the EU is going to react is going to be very, very interesting.
Absolutely, especially considering the fact they've really given up on their push to integrate Serbia and more of the Balkan states, and that's mainly due to Macron's action, sort of trying to refocus and regroup the European Union after um, the Brexit decision. And yeah, it seems like they've abandoned that. And for all we know, yeah, rejoice! I know there's probably a few out there in the audience. Greater Serbia may come, yeah, maybe in the future yet. But yeah, beyond that, just getting into the coronavirus again. I'm not a virologist, but from the spread to a few other countries from Italy. Most of Western Europe have some case now, and the out of the 12 or so Italians that have died, I think that number may have gone up to 20, at least the official number. The youngest reported among them was 62. So that shows you the kind of effect this is going to have. It seems like, despite the social panic, despite the fact that there are the videos coming out of the empty grocery shelves, and yeah, it's going to affect that way. And of course, the economic downturn. We've seen massive drops in the stock market over the past couple of days. Right now, it seems like who it's mostly infecting and people who are mostly falling victim of it. Yeah, are again those people with advanced age and the people who have pre-existing health conditions. Now, not to get too much into the virology side because really I'm not qualified to talk about that specifically. Uh, it seems like what they're expecting is this to sort of become a seasonal thing because people don't really build an immunity to it. Uh, well, a complete immunity. Like when you get reinfected the second time around, again, it's gonna be like a seasonal disease. Like it won't kill you, it won't necessarily be worse, but it might be one of those things like, oh, it's like COVID season, it's coronavirus season, something like that. But again, back to the main focus of what I'm getting at. You throw in the economic downturn from it and the social panic from it on top of the new migrant crisis. Of course, migrants coming in could be carrying not only coronavirus but other diseases, other health conditions, not to mention the social cultural upheaval. You put that all together, I don't see how this won't be a big year, 2020, like, and the preceding years for that matter, for European populists. And I'm eager for the next round of polling, which Europe elects, which great Twitter account. I would recommend everyone follow them. Uh, they release them on a regular basis, but it seems like at the beginning of every month and then like sporadically throughout. But I'm curious to see what the March numbers look like for pollings for a lot of Western European countries.
Yeah, and it's so. I mean, it's because coronavirus is yet like another neoliberal sticking point. Because you have arguments about Trump isn't doing enough, and at the same time, what's the point of banning international travel? Like people are still going to get infected. It's like saying, well, like people die anyways. Like, what's the point of it's a ridiculous argument because, of course, restricting travel to some degree does buy you time to prepare. Now, in all fairness, Trump really hasn't done that much to prepare.
Well, just gotta
But
wash your hands just like the flu. That's what he told me.
yeah, like he's in dangerous territory. I think he really needs to change his tone
Yeah, and
about this.
no,
Because I mean, it's an election year, and this could be something that really backfires on him.
yeah, and like
Um,
immigration hardliner Donald Trump coming out and acting all calm and nonchalant about one of the most legitimate reasons we would have to crack down on immigration and international travel. Like, imagine if it were 2016 and some virus to the scale of the coronavirus broke out. What do you think he would be saying at all those rallies in the lead up to the election? He would be just hammering on. He was hammering on about Zika, which turned out to be completely nothing. But coronavirus, 3 years in office, pretty established in his tenure as president. Oh, it's just the flu. Oh, just wash your hands. Take extra precautions. And I'm just frustrated about that in particular.
right, right. Um, yeah. So, like I say, he has to be careful about that. Now, the spread of the disease in China is apparently winding down. I'm not one of those people who believes that, like, there's a million dead Chinese or 100,000 dead Chinese, and they're all being thrown into incinerators. Um, you know, so yeah, like now it is increasing in Europe and it's increasing in the Middle East. Um like this is political fodder, right? Because it's still a relative unknown, right? We don't know. We don't know how bad it could get, or um, because it's an unknown, people can speculate and they can use more abstract arguments, say about healthcare and so on and so on. Um, so I think you know Trump has to deal with this in a more effective way, and now he has to do it without losing face. What I'm worried about is that he won't. Um, that he'll avoid it altogether. Unless he knows something. I mean, he's saying basically it's just going to fizzle out and go away. If he's right, like he's got 2020.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's
Unironically.
like you could say a lot of things about Trump, and we've pretty much said them all. But one thing he has going for him, he seems to have a penchant to like call these things out and like be right about these just harebrained predictions.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he very well could be. I don't know whether that's just some sort of like deep internal CIA thing, or whether maybe he released it so they could force a trade deal, and he's got the cures waiting. Now, that's what Israel claims. They claim they'll have the cure in a couple weeks, have a vaccination for it. Romania said something similar in their research when like about a month ago at this point. You've seen various claims like this, but Again, I think that as this goes on, it's probably going to do a lot of damage to the economy, and again, that's like also Trump's strong suit. And if he really doesn't come out and like renege his position, say, like sort of like up the ante, or just go complete hardliner on people entering the country and international travel and immigration, uh, yeah, he may be putting himself in rough territory, and that also opens the door to his Democratic opponents, especially Bernie Sanders, who harangues on
Hmm.
about more funding to the CDC, more funding for healthcare, more funding for emergency services and FEMA or whatever. That's going to look pretty appealing if even just a few hundred cases break out in the United States and it isn't that deadly. Panic spreads fast, and of course, the media is going to pick up on that. Anything to generate views and generate attention to them, and of course, anything to bash Trump, they'll take that. There's only a few dozen infected, they're going to run with it. Uh, I mean, you see this sort of in the inverse in Europe where populist parties are running on what are these doing? Like, even though, again, there hasn't been that many cases in Europe outside of Italy, they're saying, what are we doing? Why do we have the borders open? Why haven't we restricted travel? Why aren't we taking these very basic precautionary measures? And yeah, it very well could go that way for Trump. And some people have said this may be Trump's Katrina. I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, he may be making a very dumb error right here. But I uh, I see this giving way, especially in Europe, especially in Western Europe, to more populist parties rising. I've said that a few times already. I'm repeating
Hmm.
myself at this point, but nonetheless, it seems like people are generally less panicked. But I would say, difference between panic and concern. People are less panicked. They're less freaking out about it. At least from my gauge, what I've seen, and more concerned about it, actually starting to take it seriously. Whereas, like, of course, they say virus, where it's sort of irrational. Not where now they have more of a rational response that is again concerned, but I'm just talking in circles at this point.
Right, right. I mean, what you kind of see with Trump and what you kind of see, like listening to his detractors on CNN, is really, I mean, it's a fine argument. It's a fine argument about how to manage neoliberalism. Like, Trump is basically saying, no, we're not going to do all these restrictions, um, it's going to blow over. And other people are saying, it's not going to blow over. We have to do something. But we can't do what immediately is the most rational thing to do for a time being, because of course, the economy cannot slow down. Apparently, horrible. Oh, well, I guess because a lot of it is based on speculation, anyways. A dramatic change in things really is going to affect some billionaires and some companies, but. Yeah, so you see this argument about how to manage neoliberalism better, and like for all intents and purposes, he really does have to change his tune. Also, I think you're right that like even if this isn't a very big deal, um, you know the effects of the migrant crisis from 2015 and 16 have not gone away, and this coupled with the new migrants that are going to be coming over is going to exacerbate the situation,
Yeah, like I said,
and it's
it's
going
that
to,
perfect storm situation where any of these
yeah,
individual factors wouldn't necessarily cause that much of an upheaval, but them all happening within succession of each other or at the same time is where it's really gonna start hitting it. But also, did you hear about Trump's master plan in order to combat the coronavirus?
no, I haven't actually.
He said maybe if he gave some more tax cuts would help. I'm not joking. He actually said something to that effect.
Oh my god.
But don't worry. Maybe his fealty to Israel, kissing the ring so much, will pay off when they come up with that miracle cure.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that would just, can you imagine?
Yeah.
That's right. The miracle cure, of course, originates from Israel, and
The miracle
Israel
cure that they
saved the
stole
world.
from the United States or Russia or some other European country. That I wonder where the Mossad has been pretty active in Europe lately. I wonder if they paid a visit to Romania and are marketing it as their own.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be. I mean, I think overall, I'm more concerned about this virus than I have been in the past because it is obviously spreading. You know, it is a potential problem. Um, I've heard of cases where people sort of show the symptoms go dormant, then it resurfaces again. Often it's hard to diagnose. And it already has begun affecting the economy in a very big way. So I think we're going to see repercussions of it. As far as I know, the Olympics in Japan are still on, but I suppose there's still some people wondering whether they will. There was a soccer match in Europe that took place. It completely closed with no audience, and you saw the soccer players. I believe one team was from Bulgaria, and they were wearing masks getting on the bus to go to this match, and so it's very surreal, and never let a tragedy go to waste, especially during an election. Can be a problem.
Oh, absolutely. Now, one last thing I want to cover before we close it out. Apparently, well, confirmed actually, Mike Pompeo is heading to Qatar to sign uh, part of a peace agreement, if not all of it, with the Taliban. Now, the official AP headline reads Trump sending Pompeo for signing of Taliban peace agreement aimed at bringing U.S. troops home from Afghanistan. Now, this is news from yesterday, and the AP report is very brief, one sentence, and it's just the headline repeated. So, not much detail on it. Now, these talks have been on and off since Trump came into office in 2017. We've seen it. The most recent one was derailed, of course, by a spontaneous suicide bombing attack in Afghanistan. So nothing of that effect has happened yet, and the news is a day old. So we may finally be getting something out of this.
I don't know how binding this agreement is. It's not very binding. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just an agreement to agree to try,
yeah.
essentially.
It's probably well. Here's an agreement so we can sign in a later agreement. It's probably one of those deals, one of those arrangements
Yeah.
where oh
I,
oh
I
oh
mean,
wow.
I actually read that that's what it was a few weeks ago that they're working on. Now, I don't know if there's any kind of new amendments that have been put on, if the severity has changed since then, but that's from what I understand. But I think the bigger picture is America willing to leave Afghanistan to China and Russia? And I don't believe that they are. So I would strongly suggest that within a few weeks we're going to see a major bomb blow up, probably in Kabul and or what the other major city, and everything will go back to where it started. I mean, that's essentially what this war was for, anyways, right? Like, this war is to contain Russia and China at the same time,
Oh yeah.
because the Afghan government actually literally was courting both countries for infrastructure projects, right? Now, is China and Russia going to be successful where America was not? I don't know. Russia, of course, went to war with Afghanistan, although that was for a shorter period of time and many years ago. But how will the Afghanis look at that? Are they going to be more accepting of China's investments with respect to Russia? Probably. So, I don't, unless America is going to triple its bases in Uzbekistan, I don't see them leaving Afghanistan.
Yeah. Now, the American empire is actually in a bind that, funny enough, could have been avoided if Obama went through with the original 2014 peace plan and went for a full withdrawal and didn't start a new mission. Because what the U.S. options are now for Afghanistan, um, American empire should clarify, because again, I don't think me or anyone else watching this gets anything out of the war in Afghanistan beyond opioids flooding our streets. But again, with that small technicality out of the way, small technicality, I'll say, the options are leave it to China and Russia, leave it to Pakistan, who is on good terms with China and Russia, leave it to Iran, again, also on good terms with China and Russia, not to mention the feud going on with Iran currently, leave it to India, which is on good terms with Russia. And
Well,
really,
not
like,
with anything else.
yeah, those are your main options for that region. And you look at actually the Pakistani point of view, one of their main things ever since their creation as a nation state has been to drive a wedge between Afghanistan and India so they aren't surrounded by enemies on both sides.
That's right.
Now,
That's right. And
one of the things the United States could have very easily done in 2014 is Obama could very easily made a deal with India, reconciled them with Afghanistan. Now, of course, this is all just hypothetical, but one very realistic deal they could have done had they had the foresight. Again, make a deal with India, reconcile them with Afghanistan, surround Pakistan, who tensions were already starting to grow between the U.S. and Pakistan, even before Trump came into office. And lo and behold, that's probably the best peace deal you have for Afghanistan. Now, India was friendly with Russia, not as friendly as they are today. Maybe one of the big, stumbling blocks in that is they foresaw India growing closer to Russia, which did pan out. But point being is, there there was an out there. They could have had a lesser vassal of the empire manage Afghanistan, because the Europeans went home after 2014. The Europeans went home before 2014, for that matter. A lot of them were leaving after Bin Laden was supposedly killed. I won't get into that
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
anything, but
Well, I think it's also a question of American corporatism that's getting in the way, and that is what's happened significantly with respects to India in this triad of India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, is that there are greater economic ties between India and America now. America cannot please both India and Pakistan. I think in many respects, Pakistan held greater prestige with America at one point. Uh, Pakistan itself is I think fundamentally more unstable than it was, say, 20, 30 years ago. But Pakistan will, I don't think they can ever afford to relinquish their influence on Afghanistan, because it's geopolitically a horrible decision to do so, especially with America not necessarily showing signs of a deepening relationship with Pakistan. And so, I think Trump's visits to India probably underlined this. Um, what America can afford to do is to increase the tension. So, Kashmir, for instance, can continue to be a flashpoint. You notice that Hindus right away went out and slaughtered like 40 Muslims in India the day of or the day after Trump left India, right?
whoa, I missed that.
Yes, right, in New Delhi. And so I believe America's strategy will be to keep the tension there like indefinitely, forever, the same classic tension, the same zero resolution, because that keeps America in Afghanistan, and that keeps Pakistan on hyper alert with India. That makes India feel like they're gaining the trust of the U.S. and will have a deepening partnership, especially with respect to China. And as we know, America's relationship with China is suffering. So India seems like a better ally in that region. But India cannot secure anything in Afghanistan, primarily because they're at odds.
Oh
Modi
yes.
is definitely something on the brink of a Hindu nationalist. So, but that but India's rise and prominence, especially within the American sphere, is the kind of necessary, irresolvable tension in that area that's going to make America like, the indispensable partner.
Yes. To continue on that, you're seeing this effort, especially with Trump's recent visit, to draw India out of their really friendly relationship with Russia. And
Yeah,
that seems to be primary goal number one. Well, they'll tolerate them buying the S-400s probably because they have hopes of getting their hands on it. I'm surprised they haven't tried to break some deal like that with Turkey yet. But again, that's backtracking. That's irrelevant to this right now. But it seems like again they're bringing in the carrot right now. They're trying to woo India away from Russia, which in a way is almost succeeding, especially with someone like Modi. Modi is very popular among the establishment conservatives. He's sort of like I made this observation. I may have made it on the show, but I've definitely made it on Twitter and other mediums before. That India is becoming almost like what Israel is, where it's this great indispensable ally against Islamic terrorism, and they're this great culture that's so intertwined with the West, and they're just like a brother people to us, and we have to stand with India because they're like the United States that region, and we're united in one struggle. And of course, India has been friendly with Israel, and Modi is almost like Netanyahu. Now, I don't have the same. I wouldn't say I have the same disdain for India and Modi as I do for Israel and Netanyahu. It isn't quite that level yet. Now, I find a lot of the praise of India among a lot of conservatives a lot of eye rolling, but it's not really anything that particularly bothers me. But point being is you're seeing this push, and you're seeing, of course, like Modi at Trump rallies, and that all ties in, of course, into the visa and the guest worker program. So get that on
of
the
course.
economic level with the corporate interests. But I think as time goes on, especially if Trump stays in office, especially among Republicans more so, that you're going to see this real outreach to India, and we're going to be inundated with propaganda about how great India is. Now, I'm interested to see the line the Democrats take, since I don't see the Democrats going out right and saying we need to, stand with Pakistan or whatever. But maybe it'll be like Israel, where the Democrats follow suit, but want a just watered down version of whatever the whatever like Modi is offering. It could be that sort of situation where they're like, well, oh yes, India is an indispensable ally, but disagree with their current right wing nationalist government. How you see Bernie Sanders talk about Likud and Netanyahu, but is I'm pro Israel, blah 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 blah, and yeah, give lip service to a peace deal between the two. Now, um, Israel and Palestine, India and Pakistan. Not necessarily an equivalent comparison, but I think the point stands. But yeah, I see in throughout the decade, in the coming years, a
Mhm.
lot of that sort of media blitz on behalf of India.
Yeah, and it would seem a correct response would be deepening ties between China, Pakistan, Russia, and then Afghanistan. That all these countries right now, for different reasons, Russia has the most to lose, and so they have to be the most discreet about it. But Iran, China, and Afghanistan, Iran, China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, uh, creating something, creating stronger ties, stronger economic ties for the One Belt, and so on. Um, that's all in their common interest, and Russia could definitely play both sides, um, especially with a guy like Putin. Uh, he again, it would be another pivot area where uh, Putin could be there to act as a negotiator between, say, Pakistan and India, and Iran could conceivably sing his good graces about why he is capable of. All of this is possible, and this is why I still cannot believe that America would ever allow something like that to happen.
Oh, absolutely. And again, that all hinges the American strategy. All hinges on at least a contingency force in Afghanistan, even if it's just a couple thousand troops, just some sort of force to monitor the region, as it were.
Yes.
Uh, Now, that may get to the point where, look, the American people, there's war weariness in Afghanistan. That's one thing almost everyone agrees upon, no matter what, where on the political spectrum, uh, race, class, of course, except for the class benefiting off it, gender, whatever. It seems like that's almost a universally agreed upon thing. So, what I foresee for the American future in Afghanistan, we're probably going to have an official withdrawal, of course, keep the country crawling with mercenaries, where, yeah, it's pretty much implicitly known that, yeah, American mercenaries and, American black ops all over Afghanistan. They are still very active, if not more active, in that country, but to the American people, to the public at large, America withdrew from Afghanistan. That's the sort of direction I see this taking.
Right, right. And if things slow down, if it looks like there is a peace deal, then I can assure you something will happen where that will spoil the progress. Um, yeah, yeah. And we had an episode near the end of last year where we talked about how spending for black ops and for elite units has tripled since 9/11, and that is the direction, because as Lindsey Graham said at the Munich defense conference, I can sell 8,000 troops in Afghanistan. I can't sell 80,000 or words to that effect.
uh, what was peak surge? Wasn't peak surge upwards of like 100,000?
I think so.
Wow, that's a throwback right there. But yeah, again, I don't see. We may get an official withdrawal, especially with the campaign coming up, with a few factors working against Trump. But yeah, make no mistake, if America withdraws from Afghanistan, they are still there in some way, shape, or form. You will see the videos from on the ground in Afghanistan of the black helicopters. Nobody knows what country they quite belong to. Those troops that look vaguely American, but we can't really confirm it. And yeah, like I said, it it's I would say Eric Prince's lucky day.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
wow, I left the Syria map up the whole show, which I suppose is fitting. I forget to close that out sometimes, but I think it gives people a good thing to look at, and it's not too out of place. It's not like I pulled up like the Libya map and we didn't even talk about it, but uh,
I know. That's all right.
yeah, I
I
think
think we covered a lot.
yeah, quite a bit. Um, it turned what I intended to first be a special report on Syria into a full episode, but I think that went over pretty well. I think that covered a lot of ground in a very reasonable amount of time.
Hmm.
Unless you have any other stories to spring on me at last minute, I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, I don't have anything other than what we've already covered.
Well, fantastic. Thank you everyone for tuning in to the War Report. We're almost to episode 100, slowly but surely. Uh, it's been great so far, as great as heavy topics of this can be. Like I said, next week there may not be an episode. I'll see what I can do about that. But see everyone next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye.